Well, South Africa has been dealing with various mass shootings in recent weeks. In the latest incident, 2 people were killed, 7 others wounded at a tavern in GaRankuwa. And this follows similar murders in Soweto and Katlehong, Khayelitsha and Pietermaritzburg. Now, Police Minister Bheki Cele says these killings are not linked, but let's get you some analysis on this trend of mass shootings in the country. We're joined by criminologist Professor Guy Lamb, who joins us via our video link this morning. Guy, it's great to have you with us on the program, and I want to refer to actually the article that you've written about this issue of mass shootings, and I think your opening line says it all, just in terms of the level of violence that we've seen in the country in this month alone. In just 2 days in early July, 25 people shot dead in 4 separate incidents at taverns across South Africa.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we're kind of living in kind of violent times, and certainly we've seen over the past few weeks an escalation in this form of violence. It's not something that that certainly the police have been tracking. It's only in recent months, if not recent years, that the police have started to produce data on this. This is something we were very familiar with during the 1990s, where we sort of saw kind of politically inspired violence. We saw transition violence as a result of the political transition. And of course, we've had sort of, kind of criminality where we've seen, gangs engaging in drive-by shootings, gangsters taking each other out in the streets, competing for territory. But this certainly we're seeing an escalation in recent months.
So when we try to come to terms and sort of get some understanding about what's behind this, particularly this recent spate of mass shootings, you've outlined 2 issues, and I suppose the list is broader than that, but specifically illegal firearms and the functioning of crime intelligence in the country.
Yeah, I mean, those are sort of common features of all of this, and the sort of type of criminality we've seen is quite different. I mean, it has often an organized criminal aspect to it, very kind of broadly defined, but a key problem is that you're seeing these groups have fairly easy access to firearms, that you can't engage in this sort of violence if you don't have guns, and number 2, if you don't have ammunition. And secondly, it's around, some of these kind of events happen, especially the large ones in Soweto, where you're seeing, certain armed groups, certain organized criminality involved in this kind of violence. And it's because our crime intelligence has been weakened over the years. It's sort of been drawn into sort of political faction fighting, and it's been undermined intentionally or kind of skewed to focus on certain agendas. Its ability to sort of pick up on this kind of organized crime has been subdued. So certainly that's one thing. I know it's obviously a priority for the police commissioner, priority for the police minister to do something about it, and there are plans afoot to do that. But certainly, as we saw the weakness of crime intelligence and other intelligence structures around the riots of last year, we're seeing the consequences of that now, where necessarily the police don't have the depth of intelligence to be able to try and prevent some of these shootings from happening.
Yep.
Obviously, the kind of low-level sort of criminality where there's, sort of robberies taking place and it's a small gang, but when you're getting these kind of large types of interventions, large types of criminality, as we saw in Soweto, then, crime intelligence has a role to play there.
So there's crime intelligence on the one hand, and then there's the police's ability to investigate crime scenes. A number of incidents come to mind, but there was one particular one that was in the headlines recently. The young man who was shot dead as he was coming out of a clinic in Braamfontein. His name escapes me for just a moment. I'm going to speak to my co-anchor and get it. Mthokozisi Ntumba, thanks very much. Ayanda sitting next to me here. But he was shot dead in the midst of student protests against fees, shot dead by police who were firing rubber bullets. The case went to court. It all hinged on CCTV footage, right? And the CCTV footage would have likely identified the officers who may well have fired the shots that killed him. Police came to court. The NPA said that they couldn't find the CCTV technician. One of the local newspapers found him, this person who was meant to testify in court, in a matter of hours. Just the most basic of investigative work, it seems, can't be done by officers.
Well, I mean, it does vary. I mean, we've had some, on the one hand, we have had a number of successful convictions, especially in some high-profile cases where we've had, solid police work, but in other areas we don't. So, for example, in some, if we were specifically focusing on these kind of gang groups, these organized criminal groups that do it it's, you need the evidence to secure convictions or secure arrests first and foremost. And, you need eyewitness accounts usually are pretty reliable if you've got a reliable eyewitness. But often in these cases, people are scared, so don't necessarily want to cooperate with the police. Number two is around the kind of ballistics evidence you'll get from kind of bullet casings, ammunition casings that might be lying around. But there are other basics. So unfortunately, the quality of police work is inconsistent. In some areas it's good, in other areas it doesn't stand up in court, and as a result, cases don't go to court because the NPA says, well, there's no chance of securing a conviction here, so we don't do it. In the case you're mentioning, which is involving police violence, that's slightly different because often police are reluctant to, in a way, kind of convict their own. We see, a number of analysis of kind of IPID results that are out there. There's kind of NGO activist groups that are out there that raise this all the time, that police who engage in this kind of violence regularly do get away with it. It's not only a South African phenomenon, it's a global phenomenon. In those kind of cases, there was probably a reluctance on the part of the police to cooperate with that because it's embarrassing. It's also about exposing many of the problems that exist within policing, particularly around public order policing. So it does cut in the issue of investigation. Investigation is a key problem, but sometimes the police can't secure sufficient evidence because they need eyewitness statements, and those eyewitnesses aren't often willing to cooperate.
What about the ratio of police officers to people they are meant to protect in the country? In fact, Africa Check has a number that they've verified in this month. For every one police officer, that's excluding administrative staff, there are 408 people. How does this contribute to the issues that we've discussed this morning?
I mean, those sort of numbers are quite tricky to kind of interpret. Do they mean anything? Because the problem we have in South Africa is there's variations. So you'll get, the high numbers of police to populations in certain areas.
Right.
For example, Camps Bay and Cape Town is often used as an example. High numbers of police per population, where if you go to somewhere like Khayelitsha, which experiences similar problems, is very low. And actually, there was an equity court ruling a number of years ago which said that the police do discriminate against poor communities in terms of the number of police that's allocated. The issue is the number sort of assumes that all police are the same, and it's not. I think it's all about the sort of the difficult times the police face in many neighborhoods. So this kind of number isn't all that. It gives us sort of some comparison, but it doesn't really tell us the kind of complexity of police work. So, for example, a policeman working in Norway doesn't have as complex and traumatic job as a South African policeman, for example. So that's why these kind of numbers I don't think are all that helpful. There's also around, you've got to look at the training and the sort of roles that the police play. But here in South Africa, we like to point fingers at the police and criticize the police, but they have a very, very difficult job and they're constantly confronted with trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, a policeman working in Hanover Park, in Manenberg, very different to a policeman working in the example you brought up in Camps Bay. Guy Lamb, let me thank you for your time this morning. Thanks for that interesting perspective as we all try to come to some kind of understanding of what's happening in our country insofar as the levels of crime is concerned. Criminologist Guy Lamb, thanks very much again.
Thank you.